Well, let's talk now to the distinguished international economist, Vicky Pryce. Vicky, good to have you back on the programme. So are these decisions, do you think, down to London's offering being less attractive than it was, or rather the United States being more competitive, a more desirable place to do business?
I think the main difference between London and the US, and remember London, of course, still remains a very substantial financial market, is that in the US there is a lot more liquidity. There is a lot more money around available to be invested in stocks. And what tends to happen is when you list, you tend to have a considerably higher price per share than is the case in the UK. And I think that's one of the main reasons for doing so. When you look at what the UK has been doing recently, of course, it's aware that it's been losing in a way in terms of this prime position in this area. And it has been looking quite significantly at changing its own listing requirements. There have been many moves that have been taking place following a review by Lord Hill to make the whole regime more flexible, easier, and possibly, at the end of the day, more attractive for firms. But obviously more needs to be done if that is going to be still the prime aim.
So how damaging is this for London? We talked about several firms, ARM, CRH, others before them. Does this look like the start of a cascade of firms following suit?
It could. I think what London needs to do and what the UK needs to do, of course, is show that that it is on a sort of growth prospectus and it has all the links that it had in the past. I mean, with Brexit, of course, some of those links have been broken, but that it can still provide the funds, if you like, to make a listing attractive in the UK. And one of the things that the government is looking at and has been, of course, already announced by the Prime Minister, in fact, and his Chancellor, is looking at ways in which we can direct perhaps more of the pension fund money into buying shares or being invested in big infrastructure, which has so far not been happening to the extent that it's needed, partly because of rules that exist, the Solvency II requirements, which are EU-wide requirements, which the UK can now move away from, which limit up to a point what pension funds, insurance companies can do. If that money was available for shares rather than being spent as it is at present, buying mostly government bonds, that would make a big, big difference in terms of the availability of liquidity. And I think that's where the focus in the future is likely to be.
And there was talk, wasn't there, of Shell considering moving away from London. If London loses its traditional old economy, let's call them stocks, how damaging would that be?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the old economy, because one of the problems that London is supposedly facing is that it is attracting still the old economy type stocks, not the new ones, the IPOs of the fast-growing, possibly tech companies. We're losing out in the US to a considerable extent. But Shell did look, as well as we understand, at the valuations that are given in the US for similar types of companies like themselves, and found that they're considerably greater. And that was one of the reasons for thinking about delisting and going to the US. But of course, at the time that was being debated, Shell was listed both in the UK and in the Netherlands. And what they decided to do instead is give up on the Netherlands and in fact list here mainly. So, and that's one of the results of their own, if you like, internal consultation on this. So we haven't lost them, but there's still an issue that we still attract the old type sectors and perhaps not so much the new ones.
So can London turn this around, do you think, start to attract these newer sector companies?
I think there's going to be a lot of activity that's going to take place over the next few years. New companies coming in. I think the UK has a very good chance of, if it looks at its rules a little bit more carefully, attract quite a lot of that type of IPO that may be coming. But I think the US is going to be a big challenger, if you like, in particular because, of course, it now has also the new act, which is called the Inflation Reduction Act, which is subsidizing firms that produce and do things in the US, particularly on climate change issues. And that, of course, has already resulted in quite a lot of firms thinking, even not just in terms of where they list, but where they produce, moving into the US.
Vicky, great to get your thoughts today, as always. Thank you for joining us. That's Vicky Pryce, a distinguished international economist.